not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised.
People are understanding the power of story.
And so what I did is I pretty much did what I could. So I did an artwork.
Is there anything that you wish that you knew beforehand?
Ooh. Oh my god, so much. How to condense it.
So my name is Cara Tierney. I'm an artist, I'm an activist, I'm an educator. I live and work on unceded Algonquin territory. And I teach visual art, history and theory of art, and like gender studies, critical trans studies. And I'm a PhD candidate, and my research is about trying to understand the linkages between gender creativity, art, and education. Like as an artist, I feel like I've always been outside of the art world in many ways. And I think that a lot of artists have this experience of trying to crack into the art world. And I think even what that feeling tells us is that there is a hierarchical structure to art and to accessing spaces for art. And when we are able to crack into those spaces, like what even makes that possible, right? So what are the privileges that allow that create that possibility to exist? So, you know, if we're thinking about equity and in terms of art practices, in terms of the structure of the art world really needs to do a lot of work, is what we know.
My name is Nathan Hall. I'm the CEO of Simple Story. We're a video marketing agency, as well as the CEO of Culture Check, which is an anti-racist support center for the workplace. I used to be really into the traditional arts, right? I saw how a song, a movie would impact me, right? And they would open me up to new thinking, and they would change me. And so I thought that great art could change the world, right? And I think at that time, I spent a lot of time, thinking about the idea of art being a reflection of society, or is it more that it is driving and steering society in new directions? Right. And my thinking, I think, evolved to replace art in those questions with science, education, healthcare. Right. So is science a reflection of society, or is it driving and steering society in a different direction? Is healthcare a reflection of our society, or is it steering our society in a certain direction? Right. We're all creating, no matter what area we find ourselves in, we're all adding to this canvas. But I think at the heart of everything in our society, I found was commerce, right? So, whether it's art, business is driving art, business is driving healthcare, business is driving the education sector. And it's like, the more I started understanding that and, following the money and understanding how all these things work, it's like, it can be, you could come off as being jaded, but then you start to get the reality of, well, if I'm trying to have this impact, if I'm trying to do this or make this change, understanding the reality of how things work, how things get done, is very empowering. So then it became a matter of aligning my beliefs with my, social impact, with the realities of human nature. And then it was focusing on, how do I create more alignment between all of these things? Because when I do that, then I'm going to have the greatest impact. So I think this is what has fundamentally shaped me as a creator. And so I see creativity no matter what people are doing, what area they find themselves in, they are going to have constraints. They are going to have things that they need to tackle. And it's a matter of figuring out, like, how do I best do that? Here's where I'm at. Here's where my goal is. How do I get from here to there? And that's essentially what creativity is. It's figuring out that pathway.
Creativity, it emerges in a lot of really interesting ways. And one way that really inspires me, or one way that I like to think of being creative, is redirection. So understanding that, meanings and the way we construct meaning, there's sort of a rhythm and a tempo to it that can become quotidian and can become ordinary. And so one way to be creative is to just slightly shift maybe the pattern or the flow of meaning as it unfolds in ways that are structured around us. So to go back to the gallery, galleries are, structured in particular ways, and we have expectations and anticipations about how they should behave and how we should behave. And so, becoming aware of those structures, which in many levels operate subconsciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, trying to bring those up to the consciousness and then shifting those and, playing them against themselves as a way to make visible perhaps the structures that are embedded within, structures which of course are built across a white Western patriarchal history, and so demand to be redirected and demand to be made visible so that we can then disarticulate them. So those are moments that really excite me, where we can find those ways to make visible the sort of inherent exclusionary practices that get built into these structures.
I think the ideas of, creative business models, creating, new structures, new ways of addressing old problems. To me, it's this is where there's so much creativity. And this is a creativity that really excites me today, because now it's okay, we can have real societal change by implementing these types of creativities, by thinking outside the box and not just, sticking with what has worked or how things were done before, but really opening ourselves up to whatever is out there. Let's address these problems in completely different ways, given the new realities that we're in.
Yeah, so my name is Finn. My pronouns, I go by they, them. I don't know, just finding myself in art, in mediums and whatever. I think the urgency, it comes from that returning to the foundation of what am I doing for myself, and what can I gain from it, and how can I use my lived experiences and my observations and just myself.
It becomes a survival strategy too, right? So people actually can be quite media savvy. We can be actually quite aware of the structure of the systems that are around us and learn to navigate them, to sort of gain entry and then, make changes from within once you sort of have that space carved out for yourself. So it does also become this negotiation of, okay, so this is the world that I'm looking to take up space in, and so this is how one gains entry. And it's about sort of playing the codes that you're given and being able to use them to then enter with the messages and the ideas and the changes that you bring with you. I think a lot of what allowed me entry into formal established art world spaces was my marginality, right? Was the fact that I was this trans non-binary person and that my art deals with my identity. So I look great on a grant for somebody, right? Like, oh yes, this year we focused on trans non-binary artists. So I can become part of the box checking mechanism. And so there's always this like, okay, am I being co-opted here? Or is this a space where I can actually like stretch out and create change? And I think it's both and, like, it's not either or. I think there's probably a little bit of both things happening at all times. But one of the dangers then also becomes that, we demand of marginal people to be making work about marginality rather than like being an artist and just being invested in whatever holds your interest, right? There becomes sort of this mode of production whereby, okay, if the only way to enter the art space is to be the token artist, then, I'll make the token work that gets my foot in the door. So, it can be like, I guess, a strategy to make that work, to get your foot in the door, and then be like, actually, I'm a minimalist abstract painter, and, let's look at these colors together because that's going to make us all feel good.
When I create, I'm always kind of thinking of like, what do I have the, access to? What resources do I have access to? And like, what are the capacities that I have that I can, use to join the conversation? Yeah, it's just about like raising those conversations in whatever ways that I can to like, if it's through like a painting or a drawing or like very direct words. I think just to have that conversation of like, what is working, what's not working, what do I have, and what can I share, and what can we teach each other is always like in my view of like what art can do for me, I can do in art.
So my name is Lili Johanis. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also a fourth year student in the Bachelor's of Fine Art at the University of Ottawa. I'm really interested in critical theories of art history, and also how they translate to global politics and other issues. And during this school year, I suppose, or since the pandemic, a lot of my artistic work has investigated issues of isolation or community, and how we kind of experience space. We have a lot of like thought around who your audience is and who you're creating for and your intentionality. It's maybe less in a kind of activist kind of way, and issues that are discussed even in certain art history courses that are a little more critical are not necessarily brought in to studio spaces. So as much as we might discuss issues of equity and social justice and activism in our own time, it's not necessarily as present in the immediate environment where we're creating art in an institution, which like maybe the institution is the like black sheep of the whole situation. And once we move on from an institutional setting, it would be a little bit different, or the spaces that we would carve out would be a little bit different. But I agree that kind of like a shortcoming is a lack of interdisciplinary research or interdisciplinary environments to be mixing maybe like development students or students from the gender studies department and students from the visual arts department to kind of like curate these conversations would be a really interesting environment to exist.
So, there is even like within like a white Western art historical discourse, there is a a style of making art called institutional critique, which is really about thinking through the structures that we've built in, the practices and protocols we've built around art and exhibiting art and viewing art. And so little things like wall labels or the things that we've come to expect become spaces that are really rich for subversion.
So I do think that creative culture and art, etc., can be in dialogue with issues of ethics and equity and community, but it can also be in dialogue with like a very formal history of art, right? And not necessarily be trying to engage those themes.
I think that all art is political, whether we intend it to be or not. Hi, my name is Alexa, and I am a recent grad of U Ottawa's International Development Program. As well, I currently work for Canada's Federal Public Service, and in my free time, I am an artist. So as a creator, I operate under the name of Next July Studio, and I actually chose that name because it's rather ambiguous. And for a long time, my medium and my choice for the art I was doing was also rather ambiguous. I was experimenting with a lot of different types of mediums, from embroidery to crochet to painting to clay. That rhymed, that was on purpose. And I finally have been able to really find myself in drawing, and digital drawing more specifically. So always as a child, and as long as I can remember, drawing has always been my go-to way to express myself and to really detach from the world around me. And so I've really found a lot of comfort and a lot of peace in using drawing as a way to express myself. I've always been really interested in the intersection between human rights and sustainability with business. And one of the largest sectors and largest industries that has such a giant impact on human rights and sustainability and the environment at large is the garment and footwear industry. So my work that I'm sharing with you today is a collection that I call the Distressed Denim Collection, and it provides a critique of the role that fast fashion industries, as well as just the 1% at large, play in the way that we interact with the environment and human rights on a personal level. I think art makes us challenge the status quo. It makes us question the world around us. It makes us be curious about why things are the way that they are. And this whole idea of challenging the status quo, of questioning the world around us, that in its very essence is where ethics and equity derive from. I think simply by creating, we are engaging with politics and social movements and public discourse. I think art answers a lot of questions, but while it answers a lot of questions, it poses hundreds more of unknowns. And in doing this, it is able to engage these really important but sometimes difficult domains, whether it be political discourse and social movements. Art is at the forefront. And I think this is especially true in a digital world. I think more than ever, art is being made accessible, and the messaging behind art is being made accessible to a wider audience. And this can lead to such a strong ability to engage in these conversations and engage in these arenas, and as well as creating a greater discourse around the ideas we're trying to present through our creativity and through our art. It's answering all these questions, it's posing more, it's creating a more curious world.
So I'm Thirtsa Semajuste. I'm 22 years old, and I graduated in 2020, and I just got my BFA at the University of Ottawa. That's pretty much my academic background so far, and I would obviously love to expand it in the future. I would love to do my master's, if that's possible, in visual arts as well. My process for this work is I was on social media, and there was a lot of protests going on regarding Black Lives Matter. So I thought about the best way to represent how I was feeling in the moment and what I felt like it was. Well, I put myself in, obviously, the victim situation to see how it would feel like to be in that situation. And as a Black girl, I honestly, it wasn't too hard for me to put myself in that position. Racism is a thing, and I've experienced it in my lifetime. And I may be young, but I experienced it many times. So my process was to try to convey how I felt with the situation and everything as best as I could. So what inspired my work? So far, what inspired my work was the Black Lives Matter protest. That's what inspired my work. And there's multiple times where I was hesitant of doing political art. It's a very scary thing for me. And with my... Usually I don't really do art regarding my Black identity. It's not as vocal. It's very subtle. But with this art that I submitted, it was very vocal and was very to the point. And it was very clear that I was talking about Black Lives Matter. And that's what pretty much inspired my work. And I couldn't go to the protest in Ottawa, unfortunately, due to COVID. And I didn't want to make my vulnerable family members at risk. So I couldn't go expose myself. And so what I did is I pretty much did what I could. So I did an artwork.
And so it's really, can you, as an individual, what can I do? Can I take advantage of this? With all this access to information, am I making sure that I'm having a good understanding of everybody else, right? So now that everyone's talking about these things, I'm not interested in just hearing people who agree with me. I want to expose myself to everyone who disagrees with me so I understand where exactly they're coming from. Why do we have differences of opinion? Because to me, it's like, that's how I'm going to be able to have a more meaningful conversation. That's how I'm going to be able to make change. It's not by surrounding myself with people who think like me and talk like me. It's exposing myself to the opposite of that. And so I think it's all of our individual responsibilities to make sure that you're still diversifying your news feed. You're diversifying the content you're taking in, the books that you're reading, the people that you're engaging with. And it's not like I will only have a meaningful conversation with people who I agree with, and then I will argue with people who I disagree with. And it's, no, let me have a conversation to walk away from this so I can understand why you think what you think. And really walk away with the goal of truly understanding somebody, not to be understood, but to understand. I think we'd be all in a better place with that.
Yeah, like I waver between optimism and pessimism because, all of these, like, this is not new, right? Everything that we're saying, this is, and that's part of, I think that's part of the, the nature of violence is that often it presents itself as new, and it's not new. These are old concerns. These have been voiced before for decades. And these responses have these modes of response have also existed. So, I like to see more radical forms of action myself.
What I wish I knew before becoming a disabled person in the arts was that you don't have to hide your disability. You don't have to adhere to conventional standards. I'm Carly Fox, and I am a first-year student in the International Development and Globalization program at U Ottawa. So I was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis at age 16, and that was well into my performing arts career. And it kind of turned into, I feel like I found a lot of empathy from becoming disabled in a way. It just reminded me that everyone is going through something we don't necessarily see or understand. And so from there, I feel like the arts gave me a chance to reach out to others and build a community and just really work on my own ethics and how I approach equity in my communities. Yeah, I definitely feel as though by the time I became disabled, I had a good position within my community. And from there, I've always been very open about the experience of the journey since becoming disabled. So within my community, I've been able to do a lot of advocacy and awareness, and I feel as though that's been a really good way of embracing some understanding and some equity within those communities. No, I feel like the performing arts have given me the skills I need to better advocate for the disability community and as well to just share my experiences. I definitely feel as though the arts can be a really good tool for incorporating perspectives we don't usually hear in mainstream discussions, but at the same time within the arts community in the field and the profession, there's not a lot of opportunities for disabled artists as well as for conveying those experiences we as people with disabilities have.
When I go into businesses and I'm talking to like business leaders and CEOs and stuff, it's kind of the same conversation, but it's positioned differently. And it's like, well, here's the business impact. Here's what's going on. How do you create that alignment with like social values versus what's going on in the business, and, showcasing how this is showing up. So, to me, it's, when we talk about racial injustice or like racism, it's like the whole concept is that it's systemic, right? So it exists everywhere. And so no matter who I'm talking to, whether you're a elementary school teacher or professor, you run a business, you're in the government, whatever the case may be, you're a student, having the conversations of how is this showing up? What are the impacts? What are the implications of what's going on within your sector or within the reality of your life right now? And just being able to have those open conversations. I guess my ultimate goal is these dialogues. For so long, I felt like, I mean, oftentimes, like I would try to speak up about it over the years and you would get denied. You would get, rebutted. You would get like all of these things that just kind of tried to mute my voice. And so now it's like, oh, okay, well, anytime someone asks me to talk, it's like there's a lot of years of silencing to go. And so just really kind of sharing through all of those experiences, like, okay, let me tell you about my experiences during elementary school, through high school, through university, in the workforce, living in the suburbs now, and like all of these different aspects. I can share with you these stories, or these are stories that I've heard from other individuals, and just understanding how big of a problem this is and what to look for. Because a lot of times, like, people are very confused because they're expecting, these overt, disgusting gestures. And it's like, okay, that's what I'm looking out for. And if I don't see that, then everything is good. Right. So just creating more of that awareness around, what to expect. What does it look for? How do you better support where you are?
And it's going to need a lot of people self-reflecting and thinking about their relationship to power, their relationship to resources, and maybe recognizing the sort of inherited privileges that have paved their way. And, I'm speaking from my own experience, as a white person who has accrued a certain amount of like cultural capital now, who is able to move through these art spaces. What is it that, allows me to navigate those spaces? And then now that I can sort of access these spaces, how do I use that access to resources and power to, again, try and disarticulate those structures that are held firmly in place, which sustain those spaces as inaccessible and exclusionary and not necessarily working towards equitable practices.
Okay, so my name is Devon Banfield. I'm a 21-year-old transmedia journalist from Toronto, Ontario. I currently live in Alberta. I moved to Calgary for a job about 3 weeks ago. I currently work in radio. I'm an anchor and reporter. I love what I do. This is always what I've wanted to do. And I also work as an author and a journalist, or not a journalist, rather, an author and a photographer. So I work mainly in photojournalism and documentary photography, and for this project I'm focusing on inequity in women's healthcare, which is one of my research passions. I live with endometriosis. That's what inspires a lot of my passion around women's health equity, and it took me 2.5 years to get diagnosed. I saw over 17 different doctors, and by the time I was diagnosed, it was at stage 4. I was in chronic pain. I was throwing up, hemorrhaging, bleeding during exams to the point where I would collapse. I fell down the stairs once when I was in university because I just collapsed. I was in so much pain. And it took me 2.5 years, took me 2.5 years and seeing 17 different doctors, countless hospitals and clinics for me to get my endo diagnosis. And the only way they can diagnose you is if they cut you open and do laparoscopic surgery, which wasn't what any of my doctors wanted to do. They were convinced that I was too young. At this point, I was between 16 and 18, so it was definitely a difficult situation, but it wasn't impossible, and these doctors definitely made it feel like it was impossible that I could have had endo. I definitely didn't have it. They definitely weren't going to do the surgery. They definitely weren't going to help me, and it was hard. It was so hard, and it really frustrated me, and I never thought about how I never really thought about how I was being treated differently because I was a woman. I just thought I was being treated differently because I was younger. But in doing research for my book, which focuses on endometriosis and how people around the world live with that, I realized by speaking to and interviewing different people that my story, unfortunately, wasn't that uncommon. And I started working for Endometriosis UK as an intern when I was in school, and that's when I learned that 7 to 9 years is the average diagnosis time. 7 to 9 years to realize that a condition that affects 10% of people with uterus and ovaries, it's not rare. In fact, that's pretty common, so it really shouldn't be that hard to diagnose, but because of a lack of research and a lack of studies, things like that often go overlooked. The same thing goes for polycystic ovarian syndrome, adenomyosis, which I have, and it's not only frustrating, but it's wrong ethically. Women are dying around the world because they're not receiving adequate medical care. Black women are 5 times more likely to die than white women during childbirth in North America. So for this project, I created a series of different images and portraits, whether they were spliced between 2 or 3 people or not, in order to create visual cues, things that made you really think about what was going on in the world and how the healthcare system does discriminate, whether they mean to or not. There are racial biases, there are socioeconomical biases, religious biases, racial biases, gender biases, ageism, socialism. There are a lot of different biases that people face in the medical system. You know, ageism, racism, they're from a different socioeconomic class, so they receive different care. They have children or they don't have children. They work or they don't work. They're citizens, they're not citizens. They were born here or they weren't. All things that are really big factors in people's lives, but for the most part are out of their control. And those factors are determining what standard of medical care that they receive. And it's wrong. It's dangerous. And it is life-threatening. Women are dying all over the world because they're not receiving standardized medical care. Even in Canada, where we have universal health care, and we talk about how nobody pays for health care, nobody has to worry about whether or not they can afford to see a doctor. Focusing on how men and women are treated differently in healthcare, on how people who have a uterus are often understudied and receive less quality of care than somebody with a penis and testes. It wasn't mandatory, for instance, for women to be included in medical trials and studies up until 1990. So most of what we know about the human body, we know based on studies conducted on men, primarily white middle-aged men. So how different diseases show up in somebody with a uterus and ovaries compared to somebody with testes and a penis can be astronomical. There are different signs and symptoms for things like heart attack and stroke and heart disease, different cancers, which we know now, but we don't know the deficit of what we don't know. So we don't know a lot about women's health, a lot about how our bodies work, and a lot of diseases that affect primarily women and people with uterus are understudied and underfunded. Women of all different creeds and social classes and colors and sexualities are treated differently based on those factors, based on how old they are, based on their color, based on who they love, based on where they're from, whether or not they have children, whether or not they're sick, if they're old or they're young or they're middle-aged. And I think that not only is that a lack of equity, and do we need an emergency response to this? Ethically, it's wrong. Ethically, there is no reason that 50% of the population should be cast aside by a medical profession, which is supposed to be saving our lives. And I just think that as a creator, it's really important for me to bring attention to that. I work in the media. I am a journalist. I pride myself on being able to inform people and let them know what's going on and provide clear, concise, accurate, fact-based information, which is what I've done with this project and what I think society would benefit from knowing, essentially.
You know, you're talking about ethics. You know, I think there's a line there where how do you be your authentic self and tell that story, but then doing it in a way that allows you to better connect with your audience versus knowing what the audience wants and then shaping everything in order to better align with that. You know, it can get into a gray area where it's like, you know, it's good to serve the market you're going after, but if you're compromising your own ethics, or if it's done in an unscrupulous way where, you know, you are deceiving people, or, so it can get very fine. And you see it with like the elections in the US with Facebook and, you know, political ads and all these types of things, or with COVID, that it can get very sticky pretty quickly in terms of like what's real, what's facts, what's authentically you. And so, you know, it's not a clear line, you know, when it comes to like what is ethical storytelling, what is ethical creativity and branding for a business. I mean, I see creativity in everything, right? Like I see us all as creators. You know, we tend to get caught up in the traditional sense of art, literature, painting, music. But to me, it's like creativity is expressed in everything that we do. The way that we communicate with each other, word choice, a cadence, how I get my ideas, my thoughts, my beliefs from my brain into yours, like that distance between us is where that art, is where that creativity, that magic happens in that space. Because I need to make sure that I can transfer what's going on in here and deliver it to you without having all this extra noise and all these things, understanding your perspectives and how you're going to interpret this so that you can take, you know, this package I have in here and get it into your brain in the way that I intend you to interpret and understand it, right? So there's a lot of creativity and understanding, you know, psychology and how people work, understanding, you know, just the societal context that might dilute the message between my mouth and your ears, all of these things, you know, so it creates a lot of creativity in order to do that.
I like to think that everybody is inherently creative and that everything can be approached with creativity. And so being creative or the act of making art can happen in like the most like intentional and specific way as like being in a studio making art, but it can also happen as like the way you walk between your bed and your coffee maker in the morning can be a creative, artistic intervention into you know the ordinary.
I think like creative culture And art, whether it's like cinema or music or poetry or visual arts, can offer like a unique sensibility or a unique way of seeing the world that may be accessible or provide an easier entry to some of these like conversations about large political topics that may often seem inaccessible to people. As much as like the art world and creativity has like its own barriers to entry, and whether that's through language or space or whatever, where people don't feel welcome, it can be, an artwork can be a more accessible way to have people access an issue than like a 200-page book. So in that way, I feel that they go together, they coexist quite well. And they coexist in a kind of a unique way.
Definitely, I feel like as creators, we have a responsibility to interact with other creators and other forms of art that aren't our own, so that we can kind of broaden our horizons and have a better understanding of our communities. And that's a step towards being a better ally.
I think that as creators, whether we work in media, whether we work in visual art, whether we are singers or dancers or actors or actresses, it is important that we get out there and we make sure that while our work is fun and it's important and it's creative, it's also hard-hitting, it's also fact-based, it's also researched, it's also created with care, and it's thought-provoking. Because in order for something to create change, it does have to stick with you, it does have to be thought-provoking, and that is something that I've tried to do with my project Deserving.
I personally always feel so inspired by other artists and other creatives. You know, I see people making art and it makes me want to make art. And I hope that I am able to inspire others through my art, because I don't think that art exists in a vacuum. I think art rather has a domino effect where, you know, we're able to inspire and encourage others. And I think that's at the very heart of mobilization, is this domino effect, where when we care about something so strongly, when you feel so passionately about something, when you share that passion with others, people feel that, they pick it up, they become engaged, and art is so foundational to that.
Again, I think the storytelling is also a really crucial aspect of this process of inviting people into doing equity work, because again, when you put a slide on the wall that has like charts and graphs and definitions, there's something very disengaging about that. But through storytelling, there is this like emotional quotient that gets communicated that you know, draws people in, and then, you know, has them sort of compare it to their own story, and then they're building their own story with this maybe new frame of reference in mind. So rather than it always feeling like, oh, I'm being taught about this community that is away from myself, it becomes actually a very personal, and it becomes about the self, and like, oh, this isn't about somebody outside of me. This is about me, whether it's about my own oppression or whether it's about my complicity in upholding systems that I didn't even realize were causing this harm. It becomes this sort of moments where people start to see the ways in which they can actually be actively involved in making those changes. And sometimes that's as simple as just asking questions and not taking for granted all of the things that we've been taught, which we know now are just like, by and large, quite terrible in many ways, because they sustain modes of power that continually erase and seek to, you know, eliminate, unfortunately, those that don't fit the norm.
How do we connect and resonate with somebody? And now we're seeing a lot more of that, where all businesses, or even outside of businesses, associations, nonprofits, universities, politics, people are understanding the power of story and being able to, you know, shape people's, you know, vision and thoughts of you through the content that you're creating, how it's posted, how you're presenting yourself. And so we're seeing a lot more mindfulness across all industries and in all areas. Even, individuals now with Instagram, people are trying to brand themselves. And it's like, what's my story? What story am I trying to tell? And shaping the perception that they have, people curating their Instagram feed to be like, okay, well, this is my aesthetic for this quarter and these types of things. And so we're seeing a lot of these practices kind of filter down into all aspects of life. So, I mean, I guess there's pros and cons to it. It's powerful that people are understanding human condition, how people think about things, how people see things, how they interpret things. And now they are crafting their messages, crafting what they're doing in order to better connect with people.
I feel like art has often evolved alongside with the times. I feel like the more people are allowed to state their political opinions and their social views and such, I feel like art has evolved with that and people have used it as a different outlet. And I think it's really nice that people are using art as a way to communicate. We're so used to just talking and listening, and it's a very important communicative way, don't get me wrong. But I think art is a different way to challenge your views, because when you see art, you question yourself, you look at it, you're like, why do I feel this way? Why does it represent itself that way to me? And it represents itself differently to another person. I think art is really good at doing that, questioning your views and seeing a different perspective. I think it's very good. Art is very good at doing that. And regarding what we create, who we're creating for, I don't think I've ever created for a specific audience. Obviously, there's a main idea of what your audience would be. Like when I create something regarding Black Lives Matter, I do typically expect for it to relate more to Black people. However, I do feel like when I do create art, it also can be shared to someone else. I don't think it necessarily has to be someone from my community. I think it could be from someone out there who's trying to understand and sees my art and sees it from my perspective. Like I see art from different communities and I see their perspective. I think it's very interesting how art is just not for one person. I think it's for the people, everybody. And I think art is very good at reaching different audiences because talking about it can be a bit difficult sometimes. And I think that art is very great at showing and understanding what we see in our heads.
I think art is important in any discussion. I mean, I think it's especially important in conversations when we're talking about ethics and equity and emergency response, absolutely. But I think at large, art in creativity is foundational to any conversation. I think it's instrumental, it's pivotal, it's so important to any conversation that we're having.
And I wish people saw art as important and creative culture as important as just simple talking and listening and such like that. I wish people saw art as another outlet. Art is a very beautiful outlet to use to discuss what's going on and to state something. And I think art should be, and creative culture should be involved in discussions like that regarding ethics and equity and emergency response. I think it's very important.
And so I see the ultimate thing with creativity is how do I have that, I guess, the resilience and the flexibility to pivot, to adapt, right? We see how quickly the world can change. We see how quickly industries can change and move from one thing to another. Like the old guard falls away and something new comes up. Are you going to be able to bridge that gap? So when, healthcare gets disrupted, when the education system gets disrupted, when whatever industry you're in, are you ready for that next phase, right? So many people put so much energy into maintaining systems that exist, but this is a futile effort. It's really understanding where's the ball going and how do I get on top of that so that I can best react to the situations. And so, when we're talking about racial injustice and equity and all of these things, it's understanding, okay, what is the moment saying right now? What are the opportunities? Where's the ball going? What what's hindering people? What are the barriers that are existing that are preventing meaningful dialogue or from us gaining any traction? What's going on? And the more that you can like break all of these things down into the elements, the better you can formulate a plan to address each and every one of these things. It's like, okay, here's the opportunity for this, or this is what's standing in the way. Here's how I make that connection.
I wish people understood how diverse the disability community is. I mean, I just have a physical disability. I don't talk for people with learning disabilities, mental disabilities, stuff like that. And I think that because it's so diverse, people are so overwhelmed, they're not going to make the effort to understand it all. But it's worth it. I mean, the disability group, it's one of the largest minorities out there, and it's also one that transcends class and race and gender. It's also the only minority you can join at any time.
So how do we break out of this cycle? How do we turn this energy and this discontent that we feel for ourselves and feel for each other? How do we turn this towards a system that is failing us and failing each other? How do we turn towards this without having to have a disaster, without it having to be an emergency response? How do we keep it constant without it being reflexive?
How can your art practice, like your continual practice as an artist, be something that can be sustained?
I guess I would say that not to expect other people to know your worth and your value, and to just know your worth and your value through your own immediate context. And that can be hard because I think we live in a world that often tends to sort of stifle some of the nuanced intricacies that might make us different or at odds with the spaces around us. But actually, those are probably the things that are the most important to us. And so how to approach the art world, again, you do have to develop a bit of a tough skin. And I think, and I don't mean accept abuse or prepare yourself for challenge. But I think it comes back to that desire that somehow we're taught to seek that external validation, and that the work is only valuable if you receive that external validation, which is not necessarily accurate, right? Creativity and artwork and being expressive artistically can happen in so many ways. And a quote unquote art world is only one particular space that exists to host these moments and these expressions. I would also say make your own spaces. Because again, my practice grew out of a basement in Gatineau, Quebec. It didn't grow through art gallery spaces at all, because there were no spaces that were open to the type of things that I was interested in doing necessarily. So and find your peers. I would say, build your network of support with your peers, and then build something for yourselves and for others, hopefully. And try and work collaboratively, because there's strength in numbers. And we're stronger together than we are apart, for sure.
I'd say it's really find a way to marry, I guess, like what you're trying to create with the realities of the world. So a lot of times it's like people have very pie in the sky, and I think it's great to have like those bigger visions. And again, maybe it's a matter of, we have different people with different skill sets. So maybe you're not the one who can be the implementer, but connecting yourself with people who are grounded in I guess, the realities, and just bring that together. So we have those pie in the sky thinkers with doers and people who can implement things, because we need to bridge that gap. Like, there shouldn't be such a disconnect between like arts and, like I said, like commerce and science. And like, I want to see these fields blend together more to have greater impact. Right. So it's not just like, okay, I'm creating art for the art minded or for people who are interested in these things. And then you have to sell out in order to survive and get money and be paid and to have a job and all these types of things. It's like, I don't feel like this gap needs to exist anymore. And so I want to be able to see, wow, great creative mind, great thinking, great abstract thinking. How do we take that and tie it together and turn that into, a business model? How do we make this financially viable, that it makes sense, that it is sustaining, that it can have impact beyond just getting people to think, but it has fiscal impact, economic impact, or, science impact on and shaping society or housing and food. So, I think there's so much opportunity there in really bridging disciplines together and bridging ideas and bridging capabilities. So I want to see that just that gap between fields go away, because like I said before, the innovation that occurs in all of these different industries and all of these disciplines is such a powerful thing. And so if you have somebody who only thinks about, if I came up in a scientific discipline and I see things in a certain way, and I just stay in that field, it's like someone who came from over here is going to be able to share things and see things in a different light, right? They may not have the same basic understanding of things, but that's is why people coming together. And I see so much power, if we look at like the body, every body part has its own function, and really finding ways to respect and uplift like the different functions, right? Like some of us are eyes, some of us are hands, some of us are noses, and we all have those different functions. And when we work together, we can be so much more powerful. And so, if you're a creator, don't be scared of big business. Don't be scared of like science and innovation. Find out how to make it work for you, right? And there's ways that you don't need to compromise on ethics. You don't need to compromise on vision. But being able to tie into these vehicles will allow you to accelerate your ideas, and it creates viability, and it makes it so much more impactful, that it's not just a little niche thing that goes on college campuses, but now it goes out and really impacts the world and really changes things. Because I don't want to see because you see it all the time, like in universities, on campuses, everybody's a poet, everybody's a visionary, everybody's a writer, everybody's going to change the world. And then 5 years after graduation, we all just become cogs again. So it's like, we need to be able to do better at that, where it's not an either or situation, but you're able to do both. And so I really see, this next generation, with the tools, like I said, the internet and social media and, computers, smartphones, like we have such great tools to have such powerful impact, and we see it in the ability for people to come together to bring awareness to these issues and to do these protests and all of these things. It's like we see that when we come together for a cause, how powerful that can be. So how do we kind of bridge all this together so we can put this energy, we can put this creativity, we can put this brain power to solving a lot of these big problems? And it's not just a matter of, well, we need to burn the system and just rebuild it again, but it's like, all right, you guys are doing something that's working over here. We have good ideas over here. Let's make this happen. So I guess that would be my advice.